So what I will do today is start off and present, hopefully rather quickly, but trying not to overwhelm you with very fastly presented details, and then talk a little bit about my more recent research and a little bit of an update on the Deutsche Telekom case, which I've continued to do research. And I should say this paper is from a special issue with Valerio De Stefano that we co-edited, and and so I think a lot of the broader insights from this paper were also integrated into our introduction and our attempt to make sense of different research papers presented in this area. So here's the overview. Sean presented another paper by us this morning, and he also said, read the paper if you want the theory, because we'll try to be quick. And I think a lot of people in this room know the debates about artificial intelligence. We've already had some presentations about the regulation of artificial intelligence and the role of trade unions and the importance of collective bargaining in shaping this. And so in this paper, we're trying to look at how worker representatives are responding to ICT firm, information and communication technology firm strategies as they're adopting and using digital and artificial intelligence-based technologies. The broader project is trying to understand sources of labor power in the digital economy. We have a number of grants and have been producing publications based on worker surveys and based on interviews in the US, Canada, Germany, and Norway, and case studies. And so within this particular paper, we're looking at one chunk of this. We're looking at how AI-based algorithms are used to automate or support worker coaching, scheduling, hiring, and training. So while there's a broader range of implications and applications of AI-based technologies across the case studies and certainly in our survey data, here we're really focusing on that kind of monitoring workforce management piece. And our question is how worker representatives in different institutional settings are trying to influence these decisions and what explains differences in their strategies and outcomes. And to do this, we look at two case study firms that are both part of a European social model, Germany and Norway, where you do have strong worker representation. We're looking at case studies in those countries that are probably among the highest in worker representation. And because they are in the ICT industry, they're on the forefront of using AI-based technologies. And to connect to Hannah's point, they have a long legacy of agreements over technology and technological change. So this is not a new thing. They've been negotiating over issues around performance management, electronic performance management, outsourcing, offshoring, restructuring of work for a long time. And we're focusing here on contact centers within those case studies because has been one of the first places where a lot of these technologies have had pretty wide-ranging effects. And I presented elsewhere many times all the different very specific ways in which these AI-based technologies are used to restructure call center work. Again, I won't do that here, but we do have a summary of some of those impacts in the paper. So for the German case, what are the institutions that matter? Those of you who were in the session yesterday, we had a representative from IG Metall who went over some of this, that there are institutions that provide leverage to negotiate over technology, and I think a distinctively strong way in Germany. You have the Works Constitution Act, which has strong co-determination rights particularly over Leistungs- und Verhaltenskontrolle, which is like performance and behavior control. And this really has been a key tool that has been used. And it's anybody who has interviewed German works counselors, they will refer, labor lawyers would love it, right? They have their books, if they're particularly older, maybe now it's online, and they will refer to the paragraph in the section in the Works Constitution Act that gives them rights in specific areas and why that is a very important source of leverage. And this is certainly the first thing, as we saw with IG Metall, that gets mentioned. You also have the Works Council Modernization Act, where works councils have the right to be informed about and consult over plans to adopt AI. Basically, the word AI, or Künstliche Intelligenz, was just sort of added into the Works Constitution Act, but it was, I think labor law scholars said, well, unofficially, of course, we had the right, it's a technology, but by putting that term in there, we're acknowledging this is a really a key area. But what was different was an explicit right to hire a company-funded expert to consult on changes where AI was involved. And this has become quite important in recent years when I've been interviewing more works counselors at different firms. They all know the same consultants that I know because they used to work for Deutsche Telekom. They retired, and now they've written books and set up consulting gigs where they go around and advise works councils in different areas and different industries on how they can negotiate these collective agreements with very good provisions that address the key issues, drawing on the experience of their work with lots of other firms. So there's a kind of networking effect that this law has helped to support. And then you have strong data protection rights that are more legally embedded and have a longer history in Germany due to its checkered past when it comes to data protection and privacy, and have really been the core of the GDPR in Europe. Deutsche Telekom negotiated is a place I've been studying since the early 2000s. So I have seen the way their collective agreements have evolved over time. When I went back to study AI, they referred back to this agreement that I had heard about years ago, which was made in the context of a large growth of outsourcing of work. So they agreed that all rationalization would first be used to shrink that outsourcing percentage. That didn't mean necessarily increasing work in-house, but it meant stabilizing employment. And as they were improving the efficiency using these tools, they were not going to cut internal jobs. They were going to shrink the subcontractors. So the 25 to 15% was the percentage of outsourced work shrunk across the firm, but they said in call centers, it shrunk to almost nothing in terms of outsourcing. So it was part of a strategy to use more internal staff. And then you had a big project to study. It's called Perspectives for All Employees in Customer Service, basically to study how different digital and AI-based technologies were going to be used. This was in early days when it was more about algorithms, but many different working groups around skills, around the impact on jobs, on work organization, on employment. And they rolled out a series of works agreements then that were responding to these specific areas with a lot of employee input. So it was a very democratic process, but also with a lot of negotiation and discussion as part of it between management and worker representatives. So the agreements that came out of this, Telearbeit, work from home, that was an earlier one that fed into, then it made it easier when COVID came because they had already negotiated this agreement to move workers to home office and had experimented with that. They had an agreement on IT systems, which provided a process for evaluating the impact of new forms of IT on workers. So going beyond this performance and behavior control to all IT systems, where they had a kind of green to red light on what the impacts would be on workers and employment. They had an agreement to create a digital roadmap with management to sit down and map out what impacts technology would have in different areas, including on employment, but also on things like surveillance. They try to think through how some of these technologies might run afoul of their current collective agreements or of their rights to privacy and control. Had agreement on workforce analytics, digital cooperation. And I think the most interesting one was the working time agreement, in which they did a pilot study working together with the IT subsidiary of Deutsche Telekom to design a scheduling tool that would allow workers to use AI to have much more control over their schedules at the same time as meeting management's need to match employees with working time. So it's one positive example I've seen of really co-determination leading to mutual gains on a new tool that was designed with workers in mind, focused on getting more working time control. And then they had a manifesto on the ethical use of artificial intelligence that included an ethics committee, a joint committee between management and labor that would evaluate any new policies for the ethics of AI, and would also be a forum where employees could complain, and they would make decisions about how AI was being used to impact work employment conditions. So this is an example of the IT systems process that you have to go through. I will not translate this into English for you, as I often do. And this is on workforce analytics, which basically has like an analytics team that's doing an analysis and deciding, at different stages. They have an expert group on workforce analytics. They have the Works Council at different stages making decisions about whether these run afoul. So I won't, I think just to say that the Norwegian case is different. And the key areas are that they don't have those strong co-determination rights. They have more single channel representation, but they also have strong data protection rules. And that became quite important in this case study, where you had management deciding that they would basically pull out of cooperation and unilaterally introduce technology. But the union was able to bring a complaint to the Norwegian Data Protection Agency, and they found that these new technologies were violating employee privacy, which then brought management back to the table. So they set up a better, more productive negotiation that allowed them to come up with proactive agreements on speech analytics, in which it was basically required not to use a collection of data from employees to evaluate their performance in a systematic way. So these two, in our paper, we compare and look at how the two cases differ between more proactive or reactive in Norway. We started out this paper where I wanted it to be like, oh, things are definitely much better in Germany. And Ines kept saying, well, it may seem like that because these Norwegians, they're kind of a little bit more laid back, like, yeah, we haven't really done all these exciting things, and we're really working on these networked projects. But they also were a little bit more confident in their ability to, over time and across the industry, use some of these wins to use the cooperation and to get the good outcomes. So in a way, it was a sort of, Germany, a lot of self-promotion of how great this case was, and certainly really consistent, strong outcomes with very clear codification of rights. But in Norway, there was a bit more of a sense that they could continue to rely on informality. When it broke down, they could rely on the data protection. And so this showed that participation rights and bargaining structure ended up being quite important for just looking at the different ways that that regulation of AI developed in the two cases. We're not saying one was better than the other, but rather that some of them have their own strengths and weaknesses in a sense. And so in my maybe last minute to talk about where from here. So I think about this in terms of my earlier research on telecommunications, where I was looking at similar effects of technology in the first wave of digitalization, and how employer exit, institutions constraining employer exit, bargaining rights giving workers collective voice, and bargaining structures supporting inclusive labor solidarity were key to give unions the leverage to improve job quality. And I think the findings from this can be read in this way. I'm writing a report right now for the ILO where we're looking at collective agreements around the world. And also, we just had a conference at Cornell on AI and the future of work with labor unions that was organized with the CWA and the AFL-CIO Tech Institute. And so we're gathering examples of collective bargaining in many different countries, including in the US, and thinking through, well, what are the different areas in which unions are trying to shape some of these AI decisions. And we were having a discussion the other day. I think of it as this kind of triangle, or think about these three different ways in which these effects happen. And the description that I was just showing you of algorithmic management is more the second piece, from labor controlling to empowering. But there are also other areas, labor replacing to complementing, and labor displacing to embedding, that are increasingly important in collective negotiations. and where unions are trying to figure out how to leverage these institutions at the national and workplace level to shape outcomes.